Sarah Chen had perfected the art of invisibility. Seat 14C, United Flight 447 from Chicago O'Hare to San Francisco International. Tuesday morning, 9:47 a.m. The middle seat in a row of three. The seat nobody wanted, the seat where anonymous people disappeared into the hum of jet engines and recycled air. Perfect. She adjusted her reading glasses and returned to page 187 of her thriller, some forgettable corporate espionage novel she'd grabbed at the airport bookstore. The protagonist, a former CIA analyst, was uncovering a conspiracy involving tech executives and foreign operatives. Sarah almost laughed. The author had clearly never been in actual combat, never felt the cold sweat of real danger. Everything was too clean, too Hollywood. Real terror didn't come with dramatic music and slow-motion sequences. It came fast and silent, like the hydraulic failure that nearly killed her over the Pacific in 2019. But that was another life. At 39, Sarah looked like any other business traveler. Navy blazer, crisp white blouse, minimal makeup, dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. Her leather carry-on bag sat tucked beneath the seat in front of her, laptop, files for a Thursday morning consulting meeting, protein bars, phone charger. Normal, forgettable, exactly what she wanted. To her left in the window seat, a college kid slept with headphones jammed in his ears, his mouth hanging open, drool forming at the corner. To her right, the aisle seat sat empty, a small mercy. Across the aisle, a businessman furiously typed on his laptop, attacking the keyboard like it had personally offended him. 2 rows ahead, a young mother bounced a fussy toddler on her knee, making airplane sounds, trying desperately to keep the child from full meltdown. Behind Sarah, an elderly couple whispered to each other in Spanish, their voices soft with the intimacy of 50 years together. 198 souls aboard Flight 447. Sarah had counted them during boarding, old habit from her Air Force days. Always know your numbers. Always have an exit strategy. The flight attendant passed by with the drink cart. "Anything for you, ma'am." "Just water, please, no ice." "Of course." The attendant smiled that practiced airline smile, professional but distant. She had no idea that the woman in 14C had once commanded a $143 million fighter jet, had flown combat missions over 3 continents, had an Air Force Cross in a box somewhere in her Denver apartment. 3 years ago, Sarah Chen had been Captain Chen, call sign Duchess, one of only a handful of women to fly the F-22 Raptor. She'd logged over 2,000 flight hours, including 89 combat missions. She dodged surface-to-air missiles over Syria, executed precision strikes in Afghanistan, and once landed a crippled Raptor with 1 engine on fire and half her hydraulics gone. The Secretary of Defense had personally pinned that medal on her chest. Then she'd walked away. Not because of fear or failure, because her daughter Emma had asked her a question that changed everything. "Mommy, are you going to die like Daddy did?" Emma was 7 now. Her father, Marine Captain David Torres, had died in Helmand Province when she was 2. Sarah had barely known him, a whirlwind romance, a hasty marriage before deployment, a daughter conceived on his last leave. They'd had 18 months together total. He'd been a good man. Emma deserved better than 2 dead parents. So Sarah had resigned her commission, moved to Denver, taken a job as an aerospace consultant. She showed up to an office, analyzed defense contracts, made good money, and was home every night to read Emma bedtime stories. Normal life. Safe life. Boring life. Sarah sipped her water and glanced out the window past the sleeping college kid. 35,000 feet below, America sprawled in geometric patterns, farmland, highways, the occasional town. They were somewhere over Nebraska or eastern Colorado now, approaching the Rockies. The sky was crystalline blue, not a cloud in sight. Perfect flying weather. She felt the engine's vibration through her seat, a steady thrumming that most passengers never noticed. But Sarah noticed everything about aircraft. The Boeing 737-800 was a workhorse, reliable, efficient, over 5,000 built, twin CFM56 turbofan engines, maximum cruising altitude 41,000 feet, range 3,115 miles. She knew the specifications like other people knew their favorite songs. The turbulence hit without warning. Just a bump, really. The plane shuddered slightly. Passengers looked up from their phones. The seatbelt sign dinged on. The flight attendant grabbed a seat back to steady herself, her practiced smile flickering for just a second. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign," came the calm voice over the PA. "We're experiencing some light chop. Please return to your seats." Sarah's hand had already moved to her seatbelt, checking the tightness. Automatic response. But something else caught her attention, something her trained ears picked up beneath the normal sounds of the cabin. The left engine. Its tone had changed. Subtle, almost imperceptible. The pitch was off just slightly, like an orchestra musician playing a quarter tone flat. To anyone else it was nothing. Background noise. To Sarah Chen, former F-22 pilot, it was a warning bell screaming in the darkness. She closed her book slowly, deliberately, and turned toward the window. The college kid still slept, oblivious. Sarah leaned forward, pressing her face close to the cold plastic, angling to see the left wing and engine. At first, nothing. Just the familiar sight of the wing cutting through air, the engine pod suspended below it, exactly as it should be. Then she saw it. A thin trail of black smoke, barely visible against the bright sky, streaming from the engine cowling. Sarah's heart rate spiked. Her breathing quickened. Every nerve in her body suddenly alive, alert, the way they'd been when her missile warning system screamed over hostile territory. She started counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The smoke grew thicker. 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. The engine's tone dropped another half step. 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi. And then the world exploded. The bang wasn't Hollywood loud. It was a deep, violent whump that Sarah felt in her chest before she heard it. The aircraft lurched sickeningly to the left. The overhead bins rattled violently. A woman screamed. The businessman's laptop flew from his tray table, smashing into the aisle. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, dangling like yellow accusations. The plane rolled 15 degrees, gravity suddenly wrong, passengers sliding against their seatbelts. And through the window, Sarah Chen saw what she'd feared most. The left engine, torn and burning, flames licking across the wing's surface, black smoke pouring into the slipstream. She whispered 2 words, more to herself than anyone else. A prayer or a promise or simply an acknowledgement of who she'd once been and might need to be again. Former F-22 pilot. Then Sarah Chen unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, while around her, 197 people began to understand they might be about to die. Chaos erupted in milliseconds. The mother, too, rose ahead, clutched her toddler, who was now screaming at a pitch that could shatter glass. The businessman in the aisle scrambled for his laptop, which had split open on impact, battery and keys scattered across the floor. The elderly Spanish couple behind Sarah gripped each other's hands, their whispered prayers now urgent and desperate. The college kid beside Sarah jolted awake, ripping out his headphones. "What the?" "Put your oxygen mask on," Sarah commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "Now, tight seal over your nose and mouth." He stared at her, eyes wide with terror and confusion. "Now," Sarah barked, and the kid obeyed, fumbling with the yellow mask. The aircraft rolled further left, now 20 degrees off level. Passengers on the right side of the plane felt themselves pressing into their seats. Those on the left felt the sickening sensation of hanging in their seatbelts. A woman's purse tumbled down the aisle, spilling lipstick, phone, wallet. An overhead bin burst open, and a suitcase crashed down, narrowly missing a passenger's head. Sarah didn't bother with her own oxygen mask. At 35,000 feet, she had maybe 30 seconds of useful consciousness without it, but she'd been in depressurized cockpits before. You learn to function on borrowed time. She gripped the seat backs, moving forward against the tilt of the aircraft, her body automatically compensating for the angle. Every passenger around her was frozen in various stages of panic, some crying, some praying, some sitting in shocked silence, still not quite believing this was real. But Sarah's mind had shifted into combat mode, the same crystalline clarity she'd felt over the Persian Gulf when her wingman took a missile hit. Time didn't slow down, that was a myth, but her perception sharpened. Details emerged with brutal precision. The cabin pressure was holding, good, no decompression. The right engine sounded normal, single engine failure, not dual. The plane's roll was stabilizing at 20 degrees. The pilots were compensating but fighting it. Through the windows on the left side, she could see the full extent of the damage now. The engine cowling was partially torn away, revealing the turbine blades inside. Flames still licked around the housing, though the fire suppression system seemed to be working. The flames were diminishing, but thick black smoke continued to pour out. A flight attendant appeared from the rear galley, a young woman, maybe 25, her face pale but her training holding her together. Her name tag read Jessica Martinez. "Everyone please remain seated," Jessica called out, her voice shaking slightly. "Keep your seatbelts fastened and your oxygen masks on. We're—" Sarah caught her arm as she passed. "I need to speak to the captain, immediately." Jessica blinked, her customer service mask slipping. "Ma'am, you need to stay in your seat." "I'm a former Air Force pilot," Sarah said, keeping her voice low but intense. "F-22 Raptor, 11 years active duty. That engine is gone and they're dealing with asymmetric thrust at altitude. I can help." Jessica stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but the pilots are trained." "Not for this." Sarah's grip tightened. "How many commercial pilots do you know who have landed a single-engine aircraft in combat conditions? I have, 3 times. The plane lurched again, dropping suddenly. Negative G-force lifted passengers momentarily from their seats. Someone vomited. The smell of fear, sharp, acrid, filled the cabin. The PA system crackled to life. A male voice, tight with controlled stress. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. We've experienced an engine failure and are currently running emergency procedures. We're diverting to the nearest suitable airport. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for possible emergency landing." Possible emergency landing. The carefully chosen words of a pilot trying not to cause panic while preparing for disaster. Sarah released Jessica's arm and looked her directly in the eyes. "What's your training tell you to do when you have a passenger who might be able to help in an emergency?" Jessica's mouth opened, closed. Her training manual probably had a page on drunk passengers, medical emergencies, even terrorists. But former fighter pilots offering assistance, that wasn't in the book. "My name is Sarah Chen," Sarah continued, her voice softening slightly. 3 years ago, I was Captain Chen, call sign Duchess. I flew combat missions over Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. I received the Air Force Cross for landing a burning F-22 with multiple system failures. I'm not crazy, I'm not trying to be a hero, but I know what they're dealing with up there, and I might be able to help them survive it. Through the windows, the Rocky Mountains were coming into view, jagged peaks that looked beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Sarah's mental calculations ran constantly. Altitude loss rate, distance to possible landing sites, fuel consumption with asymmetric thrust, structural stress on the airframe. They had minutes, not hours, maybe not even 10 minutes. The plane shuddered again, and this time Sarah heard something new, a grinding sound from deep in the fuselage. Hydraulics. The engine failure was cascading into other systems. "Please," Sarah said, and the word cost her something. She wasn't used to begging. Just tell the captain. Give him my name, my call sign, my service record. Let him decide. But do it now because in 5 minutes it might be too late. Jessica Martinez made a decision that would later haunt her dreams and define her career. She keyed her communication headset. Captain Rodriguez, this is Martinez in the main cabin. I have a passenger, says she's a former Air Force F-22 pilot offering assistance. Name is Sarah Chen, call sign Duchess. She seems credible, sir. Static, the grinding sound grew louder. The plane dropped another 50 feet, stomachs lurching. Then send her forward, now. Jessica's eyes went wide. Captain wants you in the cockpit. Sarah was already moving, pulling herself hand over hand along the seat backs, fighting the angle of the aircraft. Passengers stared at her, some with hope, some with confusion, some with the blank expression of people who'd already accepted their fate. The businessman grabbed her arm as she passed. Are you really a pilot? Was, Sarah said, 3 years retired. Can you save us? Sarah looked at his face, 40-something, wedding ring, photos of 2 kids on his cracked laptop screen. She thought of Emma, who'd be getting out of school in 6 hours, expecting her mother to pick her up. I'm going to try, she said. She pulled free and continued forward. The cockpit door was 30 feet away, 20 feet, 10. The plane dropped again, harder this time. Warning bells were ringing now, audible even in the cabin. The grinding sound had become a screech. Sarah reached the cockpit door just as it opened from the inside. First Officer Jennifer Park stood there, a woman in her early 30s, her uniform crisp but her face sheened with sweat. Behind her, Sarah could see Captain Rodriguez in the left seat, both hands on the yoke, fighting the aircraft like it was a living thing trying to kill him. The cockpit was a Christmas tree of red warning lights. Your Chen, Park asked. Yes. You better be as good as your record says, because we're losing this plane. Park stepped aside, and Sarah Chen entered the cockpit, the door sealing behind her with a definitive click. Through the windscreen, the mountains filled the entire view, growing larger with every second. Talk to me, Sarah said, her voice steady as stone. Give me everything. Captain Rodriguez didn't look back, but his voice cut through the chaos. Left engine total failure, fire suppressed. Hydraulic system Alpha is failing. We're losing altitude at 600 feet per minute. Autopilot is fighting the asymmetric thrust and losing. We've got 43 minutes of fuel to Denver, but at this descent rate, we'll be in the ground in 20. Sarah's eyes swept the instrument panel, reading the story the numbers told. Altitude, 27,000 feet. Airspeed, 290 knots. Heading, 247 degrees. Vertical speed, minus 650 feet per minute and increasing. And there, on the moving map display, the terrain ahead. Mountains, valleys, and very few places flat enough to land a crippled 737. She did the math in 3 seconds. You're not making Denver, Sarah said quietly. You're not even making Grand Junction. You've got maybe 12 minutes before this aircraft is unflyable. Rodriguez's shoulders tensed. So what do you suggest, Captain? Sarah leaned forward, studying the map, her mind racing through every landing site she'd ever trained on, every emergency field, every abandoned strip. And then she saw it. There, she said, pointing at a thin line on the map. Echo 79er, Old Air Force Auxiliary Field 8 miles ahead. I trained there in 2018. Park's voice rose. That facility's been closed for 4 years. It's not rated for commercial. It's rated for survival, Sarah cut her off. And it's the only option that doesn't involve hitting a mountain. Rodriguez was silent for 3 heartbeats. Sarah could see his hands shaking slightly on the yoke, could feel the weight of his decision pressing down like the mountains themselves. Finally, First Officer Park plot a course to Echo 79er. Chen, strap into the jump seat. You're now acting as emergency advisor. Yes, sir. As Sarah buckled into the cramped jump seat behind the pilots, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. 198 lives. A crippled aircraft. 12 minutes. She'd faced worse odds over the Gulf. She'd survived. But she'd never had this many people depending on her. The plane dropped again, alarms screaming, and Sarah Chen began to talk the pilots through the impossible. The cockpit was a war zone of sound. Warning klaxons blared in overlapping rhythms. The master caution light strobed red. The artificial horizon showed their 20-degree bank angle, the aircraft fighting every attempt at level flight. Through the windscreen, the Rocky Mountains rose like a wall of stone and snow, beautiful and utterly unforgiving. Sarah Chen's eyes moved across the instrument panel with practiced speed, reading the story of a dying aircraft. Hydraulic system Alpha is at 15%, First Officer Park called out, her voice tight. Bravo system compensating, but we're getting sluggish response on flight controls. Altitude 26,200, descending 700 per minute, Captain Rodriguez added, his knuckles white on the yoke. Sarah leaned forward in the jump seat, her mind racing through scenarios she'd trained for in simulators and lived through in combat. Captain, you need to reduce throttle on the right engine. You're creating too much asymmetric thrust. Rodriguez's jaw clenched. If I reduce power, we lose altitude faster. You're losing altitude anyway because the drag from the yaw is killing you. Trust me, small reduction, maybe 10%. You'll get better control authority. She could see the war playing out on his face. He was the captain responsible for this aircraft, and here was a stranger, retired Air Force, yes, but a stranger nonetheless, telling him how to fly his plane. Pride versus pragmatism, protocol versus survival. Do it, Rodriguez said quietly to Park. Park's hand moved to the throttle. The right engine's roar decreased fractionally. The aircraft's bank angle improved by 3 degrees. The vibration smoothed slightly. Rodriguez exhaled. Okay, what else? Sarah pulled up the moving map display, zooming in on Echo 79er. The auxiliary field appeared as a simple gray line carved into a valley between 2 ridges. She'd landed there dozens of times during training exercises. A 5,000-foot runway, originally built in the 1950s as an emergency divert for Strategic Air Command bombers. The Air Force had abandoned it in 2021, deemed too expensive to maintain. But the pavement was still there, cracked, probably overgrown, but there. Range to Echo 79er, Sarah asked. Park checked the nav computer. 7.3 miles, ETA at current speed and descent rate, 9 minutes 20 seconds. Altitude when we arrive. Park's fingers flew over the keyboard. Approximately 14,000 feet, give or take. Sarah's stomach tightened. The auxiliary field sat at 8,200 feet elevation. That meant they'd be 5,800 feet above the runway when they arrived, higher than ideal but workable. Barely. Captain Rodriguez, I need you to contact Denver Center and declare an emergency. Tell them we're diverting to Echo 79er, and we need all emergency services scrambled to that location immediately. Rodriguez keyed his radio. Denver Center, United Flight 447, declaring emergency. We are diverting to Echo 79er auxiliary field due to catastrophic engine failure. Request immediate emergency response. Static then. United 447 say again. Echo 79er is a closed facility, not rated for commercial operations. Denver, we're not asking for permission, Rodriguez said, his voice hardening. We're notifying you of our intentions. This aircraft will be on the ground in 9 minutes, one way or another. You can have emergency crews there or you can have a crash site. Your choice. More static. Sarah could almost hear the air traffic controller's brain scrambling, trying to find the page in the manual that covered this scenario. There wasn't one. United 447, understand you are diverting to Echo 79er. Emergency services are being notified. Squawk 7700, you are cleared for any approach as required. Rodriguez changed the transponder code to 7700, the universal emergency signal. Somewhere, alarm bells were ringing in control towers across 3 states. Sarah unbuckled from the jump seat and moved closer, squatting between the 2 pilot seats. We need to talk about the approach. That runway is surrounded by terrain. Ridge line to the north, about 800 feet above field elevation. Rocky outcrop to the south. Which way is the wind? Park asked. Sarah looked at the weather display. Southwest at 15 knots, gusting to 20. You'll be landing with a quartering tailwind. Tailwind? Rodriguez's head snapped toward her. Are you insane? We need every advantage. The opposite approach puts you on a collision course with the North Ridge, Sarah interrupted. You'd have to clear it with less than 200 feet of clearance in a crippled aircraft with degraded controls. The tailwind is the lesser evil. Park pulled up terrain mapping on her display. The computer painted the mountains in shades of yellow and red, caution and danger. The approach Sarah was describing threaded between 2 peaks with minimal margin for error. Jesus, Park whispered. I've done it before, Sarah said. 17 times in F-22s during training. It's not impossible, but it requires precision. The plane shuddered violently. A new warning light illuminated. Hydraulic system Bravo caution. Bravo system is degrading, Park announced, her voice rising. We're down to 60% pressure. How long before total failure? Rodriguez asked. Unknown. Could be 2 minutes, could be 20. Sarah's mind raced. Total hydraulic failure meant no flaps, minimal control surfaces, possibly no brakes. Landing a 737 in that condition was theoretically possible. FedEx Flight 705 had done it in 1994, but it required miracles and luck in equal measure. We need to get on the ground now, Sarah said. Not in 9 minutes. Now, Captain, I'm recommending an immediate descent to pattern altitude. We're still 7 miles out. And we might not have hydraulics when we get there. You need flaps to land this aircraft safely. If the hydraulics fail before we configure, we're dead. Rodriguez stared at her, sweat running down his temples. Behind them, through the cockpit door, they could hear muffled sounds from the cabin. Crying, praying, the flight attendants trying to maintain order in the face of chaos. Sarah softened her voice. Captain, I know what I'm asking, but I've been where you are right now. I've had a burning aircraft and impossible choices. You can fly this approach. I'll talk you through every step, but we need to commit now. The grinding sound from the hydraulics grew louder. Another warning light, flight control degradation. Captain Mike Rodriguez had been flying for 23 years. He'd logged over 15,000 hours. He'd landed in storms, dealt with medical emergencies, handled unruly passengers. But he'd never faced death quite this directly. He looked at Jennifer Park. She nodded, barely perceptible. Then he looked at Sarah Chen, this stranger who'd walked into his cockpit with combat experience, and the kind of calm that only came from surviving the unsurvivable. Okay, Rodriguez said, we do it your way, but Chen, if we don't make it, I'm blaming you. Sarah allowed herself the ghost of a smile. If we don't make it, Captain, I won't be around to care. She moved back to the jump seat and strapped in tight. First Officer Park, begin descent to 10,000 feet, maximum safe rate. Captain Rodriguez, announced to the cabin brace positions in 3 minutes. Rodriguez keyed the PA system, his voice remarkably steady. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We will be making an emergency landing in approximately 8 minutes. Flight attendants, begin emergency landing procedures. Passengers, assume brace positions when instructed. We're going to get through this. He released the button and whispered, so only Sarah and Park could hear. I hope. The aircraft nosed over, descending faster, the mountains rushing up to meet them. Sarah closed her eyes for just 1 second, seeing Emma's face, her daughter's gap-toothed smile, the crayon drawing on the refrigerator. My mommy, the pilot. Not anymore, Sarah thought. Now I'm just a mom trying to make it home. She opened her eyes. Altitude 24,000, Park called. Rate of descent 1,500 feet per minute. Hydraulic Bravo at 40%. Airspeed 280 knots. The numbers cascaded, each one a countdown to either salvation or catastrophe. Sarah Chen began to pray for the first time in 3 years. And through the windscreen, the abandoned runway appeared in the distance, a thin line of gray concrete barely visible against the valley floor. Their only hope. Their only chance. 4 minutes to touchdown, Sarah said quietly. Let's bring her home. The mountains waited in silence, altitude 22,000 feet. The world outside the cockpit windscreen had transformed from abstract clouds and distant terrain into sharp, immediate reality. The Rocky Mountains weren't a scenic backdrop anymore. They were teeth waiting to bite, jagged peaks of granite and snow that could swallow a Boeing 737 without leaving a trace. Sarah Chen watched the altimeter spin downward like a countdown clock. Each 1,000 feet brought them closer to either the runway or the rocks. There was no middle ground. Hydraulic Bravo at 35%, First Officer Park announced, her voice cracking slightly on the last word. Alpha system completely offline. We're running on backup and prayers. Altitude 20,000, descending 1,400 feet per minute, Captain Rodriguez added. His hands gripped the yoke with the kind of tension that would leave bruises. Sarah, talk to me. What am I looking for? Sarah leaned forward, pointing at the terrain display. See that valley opening at 11 o'clock? That's your approach corridor. You need to be at 12,000 feet when you enter it, lined up on heading 285. The ridges on either side rise to 9,500 feet, so you'll have approximately 2,500 feet of clearance. Approximately, Park's voice rose. That's not exactly reassuring. Welcome to mountain flying, Sarah said. There's no approximately about the rocks. You either clear them or you don't. Through the cockpit door, Sarah could hear flight attendant Jessica Martinez's voice over the cabin PA. Passengers, remove all sharp objects from your pockets. Glasses off. High heels off. When I give the command, assume the brace position. Heads down, hands behind your head, feet flat on the floor. Sarah thought of the 198 people behind that door. The businessman with 2 kids, the elderly Spanish couple, the mother with the toddler, the sleeping college student who'd woken up to a nightmare. They were all depending on 3 people in this cockpit. A commercial pilot who'd never landed a crippled aircraft, a first officer trying not to panic, and a retired fighter jock who hadn't flown anything in 3 years. Altitude 18,000, Rodriguez called out. Hydraulics at 30%. Speed 270 knots. The plane bucked and shuddered as they descended into rougher air. Mountain wave turbulence, wind flowing over the peaks created invisible rivers of chaos. Sarah had flown through it dozens of times in her Raptor, but the F-22 was built for violence. The 737 was built for efficiency and passenger comfort. Getting heavy turbulence, Rodriguez grunted, fighting the yoke, losing trim authority. That's the hydraulics degrading, Sarah said. Don't fight it too hard. You'll wear yourself out before we even reach the runway. Small corrections. Let the aircraft do some of the work. A loud bang echoed from somewhere in the fuselage. The plane lurched right, then left. What the hell was that? Park shouted. Sarah's eyes scanned the engine instruments. The right engine, their only remaining power source, was still running, but the vibration indicators had spiked. You're getting compressor surges. The engine's struggling with the asymmetric airflow. Is it going to fail too? Not if we're lucky. And if we're not lucky? Sarah met her eyes. Then we'll be landing a glider. Park turned back to her instruments, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the fuel mixture, trying to stabilize the engine. Sarah saw the fear there, the barely controlled terror that came from understanding exactly how close to death they were dancing. Altitude 16,000, Rodriguez called. 2 minutes to valley entrance. Sarah, I need the checklist. Sarah's mind shifted into instructor mode, the same voice she'd used teaching young pilots how to land on carriers, how to survive when everything went wrong. First, extend flaps to 5 degrees now while we still have hydraulics. We may not get another chance. Rodriguez nodded to Park, who reached for the flap lever. The hydraulic pumps whined in protest, but the flaps began to deploy. The aircraft's nose pitched up slightly, speed decreasing. Good, Sarah said. Second, configure landing gear down at 14,000 feet. That gives us time to troubleshoot if they don't extend properly. And if they don't extend at all, Park asked. Then we belly land, you'll survive. It won't be pretty, but you'll survive. Sarah didn't mention the sparks, the fire risk, the possibility of the fuel tanks rupturing on impact. No point dwelling on worst-case scenarios they couldn't control. Third, maintain 250 knots until final approach. That tailwind is going to push you fast. You'll need every bit of control authority. Altitude 14,000, Rodriguez announced, deploying landing gear. He pulled the gear lever. 3 green lights should have illuminated instantly, indicating all 3 landing gear were down and locked. Only 2 lights came on. Nose gear isn't showing locked, Park said, her voice tight. Sarah's heart sank, but her face remained calm. Try recycling it. Bring it up and extend again. Park's hands moved. The gear retracted with a grinding sound that made everyone wince. Then, after 5 eternal seconds, she extended them again. 1 green light, 2 green lights. No third light. Still no nose gear indication, Park said. Sarah unbuckled and moved forward, pressing her face against the side window, looking down and forward at the nose of the aircraft. I can see it. The nose gear is extended. It's probably just a sensor failure, not actual gear failure. Probably, Rodriguez's voice was strained. 90% sure. What about the other 10%? Let's not think about that right now. Altitude 12,000, entering the valley. The terrain closed in on both sides like a vice. Through the windscreen, Sarah could see the ridgelines rising on either side, gray and brown and white with snow. The valley was narrower than she remembered, or maybe the 737 was just bigger than an F-22. Heading 285, Sarah commanded. Steady as she goes, you're right on target. The turbulence intensified. The plane dropped 50 feet, then rose 30. Someone in the cabin screamed. Hydraulics at 22%, Park called out. I'm getting sluggish aileron response. Compensate with rudder, Sarah said. Cross control if you have to. A new warning light illuminated. Hydraulic system Bravo fail. We just lost Bravo, Park's voice cracked into panic territory. We're on backup system only. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Backup hydraulics meant minimal control surfaces, reduced braking capability, possibly no thrust reversers. Landing was going to be even harder than she'd calculated. How much runway did you say this thing has? Rodriguez asked, his voice deadly calm, the calm of a man who'd accepted he might die. 5,000 feet. And how much do we need? 7,000 feet, under normal conditions. These aren't normal conditions. No, Sarah agreed, they're not. Through the windscreen, the runway appeared for the first time. A gray line carved through brown earth, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. Absolutely nothing resembling the maintained airports these commercial pilots were used to. It looked impossibly small. It looked like a death trap. It looked like their only hope. Altitude 10,000 feet, Rodriguez said quietly. Distance to runway 3 miles. Final approach begins. Now. Sarah strapped back into the jump seat, pulling the harness so tight it hurt. Flaps to 15 degrees. Speed 220 knots. Maintain current descent rate until 2 miles out, then increase to 1,000 feet per minute. That's too fast, Park protested. We don't have hydraulics for a gentle approach. Fast and committed, or we don't make it at all. The plane dropped through 9,500 feet. The ridgelines passed on either side, close enough that Sarah could see individual trees and boulders, close enough to die. Jessica Martinez's voice came over the cabin PA one last time. Brace, brace, brace. Behind them, 195 passengers assumed crash positions, heads down, bodies tensed, some praying, some crying, some silent with the acceptance of fate. Rodriguez's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah, if this doesn't work. It'll work, she interrupted. How do you know? Sarah Chen thought of her daughter Emma, waiting at school for a mother who might never come home. She thought of David Torres, Emma's father, who died in a desert half a world away. She thought of every mission she'd flown, every impossible situation she'd survived. Because failure isn't an option, she said simply. The runway filled the windscreen, rushing up impossibly fast. 2 miles. 1 mile. Altitude 8,800 feet, just 600 feet above the runway. The point of no return. Rodriguez pulled back slightly on the yoke, beginning the flare. And that's when the right engine exploded. The explosion wasn't fire and brimstone like the movies. It was a violent metallic shriek, followed by a concussive thump that Sarah felt in her chest. The right engine, their last source of thrust, their only hope of controlled flight, tore itself apart in a cascade of catastrophic failure. Turbine blades shattered. Metal fragments punched through the cowling. The entire engine assembly shuddered, coughed black smoke, and died. Silence. Not true silence. The wind still howled past the fuselage. The hydraulic pumps still whined their death rattle. Alarms still screamed. But the absence of engine noise was deafening. The steady roar that had been their constant companion was gone, replaced by the eerie whistle of air rushing over a powerless aircraft. They were a glider now, a 174,000-pound glider with the aerodynamic efficiency of a brick. Engine failure right, Park screamed, her training abandoned, pure terror in her voice. The aircraft nosed over, gravity suddenly in charge. The altimeter spun downward, 8,600 feet, 8,400, 8,200. Rodriguez's hands jerked on the yoke, his instinct to pull up, but Sarah's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Don't pull back, you need speed. We're dropping like a stone. Exactly. You need airspeed or you'll stall, and a stall at this altitude means we all die. Push forward, accelerate through the descent. Every fiber of Rodriguez's being screamed against it. Pushing forward meant pointing at the ground, meant diving toward death. But something in Sarah's voice, the absolute certainty of someone who'd done this before, made him obey. He pushed the yoke forward. The nose dropped, the earth rushed up, the airspeed indicator climbed 200 knots, 220, 240. Good, Sarah shouted over the screaming wind noise. Now level out, gentle, gentle, feel for the glide slope. Rodriguez eased back. The aircraft leveled at 8,100 feet, just 300 feet above the runway elevation. But they were still 3/4 of a mile away, descending at 800 feet per minute with no power. Sarah's mind became a calculator, running numbers with the cold precision of survival mathematics. Glide ratio for a 737 with engines out, approximately 17, 1 under ideal conditions. They were 3/4 of a mile out, roughly 4,000 feet. At 300 feet altitude, that gave them a theoretical glide distance of 5,100 feet. They'd make the runway, barely, maybe. If the wind held, if they didn't stall, if the partial hydraulics held long enough to control the flare. Too many ifs. Flaps to 30 degrees, Sarah commanded. Now, while we still have hydraulic pressure. Park's hand moved to the flap lever, but it barely budged. Hydraulics aren't responding. I'm getting nothing. Manual extension, Sarah snapped. There's a backup handle near your right knee, yellow and black striped. Pull it. Park fumbled, found it, yanked with both hands. The flaps extended with agonizing slowness, each degree of deployment creating more drag, more lift, but also killing their glide ratio. The aircraft slowed. The nose wanted to drop. Rodriguez fought to maintain the glide. Half mile, Sarah called out, watching the runway approach. Altitude 200 feet, you're going to be short. I can't make it stretch. Yes, you can. Shallow the descent just 2 degrees up. Trade some speed for distance. Rodriguez pulled back microscopically. The aircraft's nose rose. The vertical speed decreased from 800 feet per minute to 600, but the airspeed bled off, 220 knots, 210, 200. Too slow, they were on the edge of a stall. Sarah saw it developing, the buffeting in the controls, the mushy feel, the aircraft telling them it wanted to fall out of the sky. Speed, she barked. Drop the nose 2 degrees down. Rodriguez complied. The runway filled the entire windscreen now, close enough to see the cracks in the concrete, the weeds growing through, the faded yellow centerline. They were going to make it. They were going to hit short. Both could be true simultaneously. 100 feet, Sarah called. 50 feet, 30 feet, stand by to flare. But there was a problem. A problem Sarah's combat-trained eyes had spotted 2 seconds earlier, and her brain was still processing. The approach end of the runway was elevated. A small rise, maybe 6 feet high, where erosion had built up a lip of dirt and debris. In a normal landing, it would be nothing. But they were coming in flat and fast, with no power to clear it. Pull up, Sarah screamed. Pull back now. Rodriguez hauled back on the yoke with every ounce of strength. The nose lifted. The main landing gear cleared the lip by inches. Sarah could have reached out and touched it. But the nose gear didn't. The nose wheel slammed into the dirt embankment at 190 knots. The impact was apocalyptic. The nose gear strut, already questionable with its faulty indicator light, sheared completely off. The nose of the aircraft plowed into the concrete runway, metal shrieking against pavement in a shower of sparks that looked like a fireworks display from hell. The fuselage pitched forward at a sickening angle. Passengers screamed as they were thrown against their seatbelts. Luggage bins exploded open, bags and debris raining down. "BRAKS," Sarah yelled. Rodriguez and Park both stomped the brake pedals. With minimal hydraulics and no thrust reversers, the brakes were marginal at best, but it was all they had. The aircraft skidded down the runway on its belly, the friction creating enough heat to melt paint. The left wing tip touched down, scraping pavement, tearing away. Smoke poured from the contact points. 3,000 feet of runway remaining. 2,500 feet. They were slowing, but not enough. 2,000 feet. The end of the runway approached, and beyond it, Sarah could see what waited. A 50-foot drop into a rocky ravine. If they went off the end at anything more than walking speed, the aircraft would tumble, break apart, burn. 1,500 feet. "Emergency brake," Sarah shouted, reaching forward to pull the parking brake lever with both hands. It was a desperation move. The parking brake wasn't designed for this, could lock the wheels, could send them into an uncontrollable spin. She pulled it anyway. The wheels locked. The aircraft slewed left, sliding sideways now, the friction even greater. 1,000 feet. Rodriguez steered into the skid, using the last vestiges of rudder control. The plane straightened. 800 feet. The screeching of metal on concrete was so loud it drowned out the screams, the alarms, everything. 600 feet. Sarah could see individual rocks in the ravine now, could see the drop, could see where they would die if they didn't stop. 400 feet. The aircraft was still moving at 40 knots, too fast, way too fast. 300 feet. Park was crying, still standing on the brakes. Rodriguez had his eyes closed, pulling back on the yoke even though it did nothing, muscle memory trying to will the aircraft to stop. 200 feet. Sarah thought of Emma one last time, pictured her daughter's face, whispered, "I'm sorry, baby." 100 feet. The aircraft shuddered, groaned, and with one final metallic shriek that sounded almost like relief, stopped. The nose hung over the edge of the ravine, tilted down at a 40-degree angle. Rocks and debris fell into the chasm below. The aircraft teetered like a seesaw, balanced on its center of gravity. For 3 eternal seconds no one moved, no one breathed. Then slowly the aircraft settled backward, away from the edge, groaning as it came to rest on solid ground. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Sarah's hands were shaking. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break her ribs. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Rodriguez turned to look at her, his face ghost-white. Are we alive?" Before Sarah could answer, a voice from the cabin broke the silence. A single passenger, then another, then a cascading wave of sound. Cheering, crying, laughing. The sound of people who'd looked death in the face and lived to tell about it. Sarah unbuckled from the jump seat on legs that felt like water. Through the cockpit window, she could see the first emergency vehicles racing toward them across the desert scrubland, their lights flashing red and blue. They'd made it. Somehow, impossibly, against every odd and probability, they'd made it. "Evacuate," Sarah said quietly. "Get everyone off this aircraft now." Because they weren't safe yet. Fuel was leaking. Sparks were still flying. And fire, Sarah knew from bitter experience, had a way of finding spilled aviation fuel. The real race against death had just begun. Sarah threw open the cockpit door. The cabin was chaos incarnate. Oxygen masks dangled like jungle vines. Overhead bins hung open, their contents scattered across seats and aisles. A woman's laptop was embedded in the seat back in front of her. Carry-on bags blocked the aisle. And everywhere people were crying, screaming, or sitting in shocked silence. But they were alive. "Listen up," Sarah's voice cut through the pandemonium with the authority of 11 years commanding fighter squadrons. "This aircraft is not safe. We have fuel leaks and potential fire. We're evacuating now. Follow crew instructions exactly. No bags, no belongings, move." Flight attendant Jessica Martinez was already at the forward door, her hands shaking as she tried to deploy the emergency slide. The door opened, but the slide inflated only halfway before stopping. Damaged hydraulics meant no pressure for full deployment. "It's not working," Jessica's voice cracked with panic. Sarah pushed past her, evaluated the situation in 2 seconds. The slide hung limp, unusable. They were 15 feet above rocky ground. Jumping would mean broken ankles, legs, or worse. "Aft exits," Sarah commanded. "Move everyone to the rear. Jessica, you and the other attendants get the aft slides deployed. I'll handle traffic flow here." Sarah turned to the passengers in the forward section. 20, maybe 25 people, all staring at her with the wide-eyed look of people still processing survival. "Everyone up, leave everything, form a single file line and move to the back of the aircraft. Walk fast but don't run. Help anyone who needs it, G.O." The businessman from seat 14A stood first, his legs unsteady. "My laptop is replaceable. Your life isn't. Move." He moved. The college kid who'd been sleeping when the nightmare began stumbled into the aisle, blood running from a cut above his eye where he'd hit the seat back during impact. Sarah grabbed his arm. "Can you walk?" "Why, yeah, I think so." "Then walk fast." Sarah moved through the cabin like a drill sergeant, pulling people from their seats, breaking them out of shock-induced paralysis. The elderly Spanish couple held each other, frozen in fear. "Señor, señora, vamos." Sarah's high school Spanish was rusty but functional. "Ahora fuego." The word fuego, fire, penetrated their shock. They stood, holding hands, and shuffled toward the rear. The young mother with the toddler was curled over her child, both alive but the woman's arm bent at an unnatural angle. Broken. The toddler screamed, more from fear than injury. "Can you walk?" Sarah asked, her voice softening. I think so, my arm." "I know, we'll get you help, but we need to move now." Sarah gently took the toddler from her good arm. The child, maybe 2 years old, grabbed Sarah's blazer and buried her face in Sarah's shoulder. "Come on," Sarah said to the mother. "Stay with me." They moved toward the rear, Sarah carrying the child, the mother following, cradling her broken arm. Behind them, smoke began seeping into the forward cabin. Gray wisps at first, then thicker. The acrid smell of burning insulation and fuel. "Smoke in the cabin," someone screamed. Sarah's heart rate spiked, but her voice remained calm. "Keep moving, do not panic, the exits are clear." But they weren't clear, not entirely. At the aft section, Jessica and another flight attendant, Michael Chen, no relation, had managed to deploy the right rear slide. It inflated properly, a yellow chute extending to the rocky ground below. Passengers were already sliding down, some gracefully, some tumbling, but everyone making it to the ground alive. The left rear exit was a different story. The wing had been damaged during the skid, and part of it had collapsed against the fuselage, blocking the door. Michael was trying to open it anyway, yanking on the handle with both hands. "It's jammed," he shouted. "Forget it," Sarah called back, still carrying the toddler. "Everyone goes out the right side. Single file, slide on your bottom, hands crossed over your chest. Don't try to stand at the bottom, crawl away from the aircraft." The evacuation became a controlled stream. Passengers disappeared down the slide one after another. Some hesitated at the door, afraid of the drop, but Jessica and Michael pushed them through with urgent encouragement. Sarah handed the toddler to Jessica. "Get her out. Mother's right behind with a broken arm, she'll need help at the bottom." "What about you?" "I'm doing a sweep, making sure no one's left behind." Sarah turned back into the cabin, moving forward against the flow. The smoke was thicker now, hanging at head level, burning her eyes and throat. She pulled her blazer up to cover her nose and mouth. "Anyone still here?" she shouted. "Call out." Silent, except for the crackling of flames somewhere in the forward section. She moved row by row, checking under seats in the bathrooms, anywhere someone might be trapped or unconscious. Row 20, row 15, row 10. The heat was building. The fire was spreading faster than she'd hoped. Row 5. A sound whimpering. Sarah's head snapped toward it. There, a teenage girl, maybe 16, wedged between two seats, her leg caught in the twisted metal framework. She'd been in the aisle when they crashed, Sarah realized. Thrown forward by the impact and trapped. "Help," the girl whispered, her face gray with pain and shock. I can't move." Sarah dropped beside her, evaluating the situation. The seat frame had buckled, pinning the girl's left leg below the knee. It looked broken, possibly shattered. Moving her would cause excruciating pain. Not moving her would mean death. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, her hands already working to bend the metal. "Kayla." "Okay, Kayla, I'm Sarah. I'm going to get you out, but it's going to hurt. I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that?" The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. Sarah grabbed the seat frame with both hands and pulled. Her muscles, kept strong by 3 years of CrossFit and running, strained against the metal. It didn't budge. The smoke was at chest level now. The crackling had become a roar. Through the cabin windows, Sarah could see orange flickers, fire dancing along the wing. She tried again, pulling harder, grunting with effort. The metal groaned but held. "Please," Kayla sobbed, "please don't leave me." Sarah looked into her eyes, seeing her own daughter's face superimposed over the teenager's features. Emma, who would grow up without a mother if Sarah didn't make it out, but who would also grow up knowing her mother had saved lives, even at the cost of her own. "I'm not leaving you," Sarah said firmly. "Hold on." She braced her feet against the opposite seat, positioned her hands on the buckled frame, and pulled with every ounce of strength she possessed, channeling years of physical training, the muscle memory of hauling herself into fighter cockpits, of surviving G-forces that crushed normal people. The metal groaned, shifted, bent, broke. Kayla's leg came free. She screamed with pain, a sound that would haunt Sarah's dreams for years. "I've got you." Sarah lifted the girl in a fireman's carry, ignoring the pain in her own back, her own screaming muscles. She stood, stumbled, found her balance. The flames had reached the forward galley. The cabin was an oven. The exit was 50 feet away, through smoke so thick Sarah could barely see 3 feet ahead. She put her head down and ran. Her lungs burned. Her eyes streamed tears. Kayla's weight threatened to buckle her knees with every step, but Sarah had run obstacle courses in full combat gear, had pushed through pain that would hospitalize civilians. She could do this. Had to do this. 30 feet. 20 feet. The exit appeared through the smoke, a rectangle of blessed daylight and fresh air. 10 feet. A ceiling panel crashed down, missing Sarah by inches. 5 feet. Michael Chen appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide. "Jesus Christ, I thought you were." "Take her," Sarah shoved Kayla toward him. He grabbed the girl, passed her to waiting hands below. "Your turn." Michael grabbed Sarah's arm. Sarah looked back into the inferno that had been a passenger cabin. "Everyone's out." "You were the last." "You're sure?" "I counted. 198 boarded, 198 accounted for. Now move." Sarah dove through the exit, hit the slide, tumbled down in a graceless heap, and crashed onto the rocky ground at the bottom. Emergency responders were everywhere. Firefighters, paramedics, police. Someone threw a blanket over her shoulders. Someone else pressed an oxygen mask to her face. Behind her, flames engulfed the aircraft. The heat was intense even 50 yards away. Firefighters sprayed foam, but the fire had too much fuel, too much hunger. Sarah sat on the ground, lungs heaving, watching the Boeing 737 burn. Every passenger safe. Every crew member alive. 0 fatalities. Against impossible odds, they'd won. She closed her eyes and finally, for the first time since the engine exploded at 35,000 feet, Sarah Chen allowed herself to shake. Sarah sat on a boulder 50 yards from the burning wreckage, watching flames devour what remained of United Flight 447. The aircraft that had carried them across the sky now looked like a dying dragon, black smoke billowing into the Colorado afternoon. Firefighters battled the blaze with foam cannons, but they were fighting a losing war. The 737 would burn until there was nothing left but scorched metal and memory. A paramedic knelt beside her, shining a penlight in her eyes. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" "Sarah Chen." Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Do you know where you are?" Echo 79er, Old Air Force Auxiliary Field, approximately 40 miles southwest of Grand Junction. The paramedic smiled slightly. "You're very precise. Any pain, difficulty breathing?" Sarah took inventory of her body. Everything hurt, her back from carrying Kayla, her hands scraped raw from bending metal, her lungs burning from smoke inhalation. But she was alive, whole. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not fine. You have second-degree burns on your hands and significant smoke inhalation. We need to transport you to." After, Sarah's tone left no room for argument. "After I know everyone else is okay." The paramedic started to protest, then caught something in Sarah's eyes, the look of someone who'd made command decisions under fire and wouldn't be swayed by medical protocol. He sighed, wrapped her hands in gauze, and moved on to the next patient. Around her, the scene looked like a disaster movie. 198 people scattered across the desert landscape in various states of shock and injury. Some sat alone, staring at nothing. Others clustered in groups, holding each other, crying, laughing with the manic energy of people who couldn't quite believe they'd survived. Ambulances lined up like a convoy, medics triaging injuries. Broken bones, cuts, burns, but miraculously, no deaths. Captain Rodriguez found her there. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with soot, but he was walking. He lowered himself onto the boulder beside her without asking permission. For a long moment, neither spoke. They just watched the fire together. "I've been flying for 23 years, Rodriguez said finally. 15,000 hours. Never lost a passenger. Never even had a serious injury." He turned to look at her. "Today, I thought that was going to end. I thought I was going to kill everyone on that plane. But you didn't. Because of you." His voice cracked. "If you hadn't been on that flight, if you hadn't walked into my cockpit, we'd all be dead. You know that, right?" Sarah didn't respond. She was thinking about chaos theory, about the infinite variables that had put her in seat 14C if she'd taken an earlier flight, if she'd chosen a different airline, if she'd decided to drive instead of fly. 198 people dead because Sarah Chen decided to read a thriller at 35,000 feet. Or alive because of the same reason. "It wasn't just me," Sarah said quietly. "You kept your head, Park didn't panic. The flight attendants did their jobs, it was everyone." "Don't be humble, it doesn't suit you." Sarah almost smiled. "I'm not being humble, I'm being honest. In combat, nobody survives alone, it's always a team." Jennifer Park appeared, escorted by a paramedic who was trying unsuccessfully to convince her to lie down on a stretcher. Her right wrist was splinted, broken during the impact, but she waved off help with her good hand. "The FAA is here," Park announced. "NTSB too, they want statements from all of us, especially you, Sarah." As if summoned by her words, a man in a Navy windbreaker with NTSB, emblazoned on the back, approached. He was 50-ish, gray-haired, with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too many crash sites. "Ms. Chen, I'm Senior Investigator Robert Walsh, National Transportation Safety Board. I understand you were instrumental in landing this aircraft." "I provided advice to the flight crew," Sarah said carefully, her military training kicking in. Statements to federal investigators needed precision, not heroics. "I've spoken to Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Park. They both credit you with saving their lives and the lives of everyone on this plane." Walsh pulled out a digital recorder. "I'll need a full statement, but first, were you acting as crew or passenger?" "Passenger, seat 14C. But you have flight experience." "Former Air Force, F-22 Raptor pilot, separated 3 years ago." Walsh's eyebrows rose. "F-22, you're one of the Raptor pilots." He said it with the reverence usually reserved for astronauts or test pilots. The F-22 program had only graduated a handful of women. Sarah was part of aviation elite, whether she wanted to be or not. "Was," Sarah corrected. "I'm a civilian now." "Today you were a pilot when it mattered most." Walsh tucked away his recorder. "We'll need detailed statements from all of you, but that can wait until you've received medical attention. For now, on behalf of the NTSB and every person here, thank you." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted near the triage area. A woman's voice, loud and insistent. "Where is she? Where's the pilot who saved us?" The crowd parted, and the young mother Sarah had helped evacuate appeared, her broken arm now in a proper sling, her toddler clutching her good hand. Behind them came others: the businessman, the college student with the bandaged head, the elderly Spanish couple, Kayla in a wheelchair with her shattered leg splinted. More passengers joined, then more. Within seconds, Sarah was surrounded by a crowd of people, strangers 30 minutes ago, now bound together by shared trauma and miraculous survival. The businessman spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "You carried my daughter out of that plane." He wasn't making sense. Sarah hadn't carried his daughter. Then she understood. To him, every person Sarah saved was someone's daughter, someone's son. Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it. The young mother stepped forward, tears streaming. "You saved my baby. My little girl is alive because of you." Sarah started, but the words caught in her throat. Kayla, the teenager she'd pulled from the wreckage, wheeled closer. "You came back for me. The plane was on fire and you came back." The elderly Spanish woman pressed something into Sarah's bandaged hands, a rosary worn smooth from decades of prayers. "Eres un angel," she whispered. "You are an angel." Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed. "I'm not a hero, I just did what anyone would." "Bullshit," Rodriguez's voice cut through. "Anyone else would have stayed in their seat. You ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. That's the definition of a hero." Sarah looked at the faces surrounding her. Young and old, different races, different backgrounds, united by the simple fact that they were alive. These weren't statistics or passengers or mission objectives. They were human beings, with families waiting for them, futures ahead of them, lives that would continue because of split-second decisions made in a burning cockpit. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She'd forgotten she even had it. The screen showed 47 missed calls, 63 texts, most from unknown numbers, media probably, but one name appeared repeatedly: Emma's school. Sarah's hand shook as she dialed. The school secretary answered on the first ring. "Ms. Chen, thank God, we've been trying to reach you for an hour. We saw the news. Is it true you were on that plane?" "I'm fine, I'm okay. Can I talk to Emma?" Of course, hold on." 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours. Then, Mommy. Sarah's composure, which had held through engine failure, emergency landing, fire and evacuation, shattered at the sound of her daughter's voice. "Hey baby," she managed, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "The news said your plane crashed. They said people might be dead. Are you dead, Mommy?" "No, sweetie, I'm not dead. I'm very much alive, and I'm coming home." "Promise?" Sarah looked at the burning wreckage, at the survivors surrounding her, at the impossible convergence of luck and skill and timing that had kept them all alive. "I promise, baby, I promise." She hung up, wiping her eyes with her bandaged hands. When she looked up, she found Jessica Martinez standing there, holding something. Sarah's thriller novel, somehow rescued from the wreckage, its pages singed but intact. "You dropped this," Jessica said with a smile. "Thought you might want to know how it ends." Sarah took the book, looked at the cover, the corporate espionage story that had seemed so thrilling an hour ago. It felt ridiculous now. Fiction could never match reality. She handed it back to Jessica. "You keep it. I think I've had enough excitement for one lifetime." In the distance, news helicopters circled like vultures. The story was already breaking. Miracle landing in Colorado. Former fighter pilot saves passenger jet. 198 survive against impossible odds. Tomorrow, Sarah would face cameras and questions, and the weight of sudden fame. But today, right now, she was just a woman sitting on a rock in the desert, alive and whole, with a daughter waiting at home. Sometimes that was all that mattered. 3 days later, Sarah Chen stood in the kitchen of her Denver apartment, making scrambled eggs while morning sunlight streamed through the window. Normal. Mundane. Exactly what she'd wanted 3 years ago when she'd walked away from the Air Force. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Her phone sat on the counter, silenced but still flashing with notifications. Interview requests from every major network, book deals, movie offers. The governor of Colorado wanted to give her a medal. The Air Force wanted her to speak at the academy. Her inbox had 847 unread emails. She ignored all of it and flipped the eggs. "Mommy, you're on TV again." Emma's voice called from the living room. Sarah walked in to find her 7-year-old daughter sitting, cross-legged in front of the television, watching CNN replay footage of the burning 737 for what must have been the 100th time in 3 days. "Turn it off, sweetie." "But they're talking about you. Pilot saves 198 lives. That's you." Sarah grabbed the remote and switched off the TV. "Enough. How about we talk about your spelling test instead?" Emma pouted but grabbed her backpack. As she pulled out her homework, she said quietly, "Daddy was a hero too, wasn't he?" Sarah's breath caught. They rarely talked about David. Emma had been so young when he died, her memories more constructed from photographs than actual recollection. "Yes," Sarah said, kneeling to eye level with her daughter. "He was very brave." "Did he save people like you did?" "He saved his whole squad. He put himself in danger so other Marines could get to safety." Emma processed this, her face serious beyond her years. "Is that why you stopped being a pilot? Because you didn't want to die like Daddy?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. Sarah had told herself she'd left for Emma's sake, to give her daughter stability, to be present. But maybe there was more truth in Emma's innocent question than Sarah had admitted to herself. "I stopped because I wanted to be here for you," Sarah said carefully. "Because you're the most important thing in my world." "But you miss it, don't you, flying?" Sarah started to deny it, then stopped. Emma deserved honesty. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I miss the purpose, the feeling of doing something that matters." "Saving all those people mattered, Mommy." Yes, it did." The doorbell rang. Sarah checked the peephole and sighed. Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Park stood in the hallway, both in civilian clothes, both looking as exhausted as Sarah felt. She opened the door. "How did you find my address?" "NTSB report," Rodriguez said with a tired smile. "Technically public record. We brought coffee." He held up a carrier with 3 cups from the local cafe. "And croissants, peace offering for the intrusion." Sarah stepped aside to let them in. Emma stared at the visitors with wide eyes. "You were on the plane too," Emma declared, pointing at Rodriguez. "I saw you on the news." "Guilty," Rodriguez said, kneeling down. "And you must be Emma. Your mom talked about you a lot." "Did she save you?" "She saved all of us." Emma beamed with pride, and Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. The adults moved to the kitchen while Emma returned to her homework. Sarah poured the coffee into actual mugs, a small gesture of hospitality. "The preliminary NTSB report came back," Park said, her broken wrist now in a lightweight cast. "Catastrophic turbine blade failure in the left engine, likely from metal fatigue. Then the right engine suffered compressor damage from debris. We never had a chance." "Except we did," Rodriguez added, meeting Sarah's eyes, "because you were there." "Why are you really here?" Sarah asked. "Not for coffee and small talk." Rodriguez and Park exchanged glances. Park spoke first. "United offered us both counseling. Standard protocol after an incident like this. But talking to a therapist who's never stared death in the face isn't the same as talking to someone who understands." "We can't sleep," Rodriguez admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that runway rushing up. I feel the controls fighting me. I hear the passengers screaming." His hands trembled around his coffee mug. "How do you deal with it? You've been through combat, real life and death situations. How do you move past it? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking at these two people who'd shared the most terrifying experience of their lives with her. They weren't just looking for answers. They were looking for permission to feel what they were feeling. You don't move past it, Sarah said finally. You move through it. You acknowledge that what happened was real and terrifying and that being scared doesn't make you weak. You talk about it with each other, with people who were there, with professionals if you need to. She paused. And you remember that you survived. You did your jobs under impossible circumstances and everyone went home. Because of you, Park insisted. With me, Sarah corrected. There's a difference. I couldn't have landed that plane. I'm not rated for commercial aircraft. I don't know the 737 systems like you do. I couldn't have executed that approach. What I gave you was perspective from a different kind of flying, but you too did the work. Own that. Rodriguez's eyes were wet. The airline wants me back in the cockpit in 2 weeks. I don't know if I can. Can't or won't. What's the difference? Can't means it's impossible. Won't means it's a choice. Sarah leaned forward. Here's what I know. You're a damn good pilot. You kept your head when most people would have panicked. You trusted your training and took advice from a stranger because it was the right call. Those instincts, they don't go away because you had one bad day. Bad day, Park laughed shakily. That's an understatement. Worst day of your career, and you survived it. That means the next worst day will be easier. They talked for another hour. About the investigation, the media circus, the passengers who'd reached out with gratitude. The elderly Spanish couple had sent Rodriguez a hand-painted icon of St. Joseph of Cupertino, patron saint of aviation. The businessman was establishing a scholarship fund in the crew's names. Kayla, the teenager Sarah had pulled from the wreckage, had written a college essay about the experience that earned her early admission to MIT. Lives continued, changed but continuing. After Rodriguez and Park left, Sarah found Emma at the kitchen table, her homework forgotten, drawing with crayons. Sarah looked over her shoulder at the picture. A plane in the sky, stick figures with parachutes, and one figure with a cape and the word Mommy written in crayon. Is that from the crash? Sarah asked. No, Emma said seriously. It's you flying, because you're going to fly again, right? I don't know, sweetie. You should, you're really good at it. That night after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat on her balcony with a glass of wine, watching planes cross the Denver sky. Each one carried hundreds of people, going to weddings, funerals, vacations, business meetings. Ordinary lives in the extraordinary act of defying gravity. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Chen, this is General Patricia Morrison, Air Force Special Operations Command. We should talk. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. She thought about Emma's question. You miss it, don't you? She thought about Rodriguez's fear and Park's determination. She thought about 198 people who were alive, because she'd been in seat 14C with skills she'd thought she'd left behind. Maybe she had walked away from the Air Force, but she'd never stopped being a pilot. It wasn't what she did, it was who she was. And pretending otherwise hadn't made her happy or Emma safer. It had just made her incomplete. Sarah picked up her phone and typed, General Morrison, I'm listening. Then she looked up at the stars, at the vast darkness where she'd once felt most alive, and smiled. Some people were meant for the ground. They built lives of quiet stability, and there was honor in that. But some people were meant for the sky, and denying that didn't make them safer, it just made them less. Sarah Chen had spent 3 years being normal. Tomorrow, she'd start being herself again. She walked inside, kissed Emma's sleeping forehead, and whispered, Mommy's going to fly again, baby, but this time I'm coming home every night. I promise. Outside, another plane crossed the stars, carrying its own cargo of hopes and fears and ordinary miracles. And somewhere in the darkness, Sarah Chen smiled, knowing she'd soon join them. not running from who she was, but embracing it. Finally, the end.
O il blu. Oh, il blu. C'è una piattaforma più in basso. Mi serve velocità. Mi serve velocità per sbucare da lì e saltare minchia, fino laggiù è veramente lungo. Mi serve tanta velocità. È stato, che paura. Ci posso provare a farlo molto semplicemente come al solito. Qui si può mettere il portale? Ovviamente no. Questi potrebbero tornare utili, non credo. No, non credo. Ma l'unica cosa che mi viene in mente è questa a sto punto, allora, scusami. Però mi fa veramente strano, non credo di riuscire. Sono morto? No, è giusto, è giusto, è giusto! Non avevo pensato che pigliavo l'azzurro. Era per forza così, ma pensavo di dover prendere ancora più velocità. Ma ha trovato la torta. Potrebbe essere la torta. Ok, 16 o 17, questo mi sa 17, questo era il 16.
I'll bet you're both dying to know what your big surprise